Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Rochelle Ferguson-Biyahi. Coming up in this week's show. After Syrian troops retake the ancient city of Palmyra, residents slowly attempt to rebuild their lives. Syrians prepare to vote in the second legislative election since 2011, but are voters actually interested? And in Egypt, tiny painkillers called Tramadol prove increasingly dangerous for people's health. But first, under a controversial EU deal, Greece has begun deporting the first migrants to Turkey in a bid to stem the flow of people heading to Europe's shores. Well, the accord has drawn a widespread condemnation from rights groups who say Turkey isn't safe for migrants to return to. Under the agreement, for each Syrian migrant returned to Turkey, the EU will welcome another Syrian who's made a legitimate asylum request. Syrian troops backed by Russian airstrikes have retaken the town of al-Qaryatain in the latest triumph against the Islamic State group. Well, the army says the town could now serve as a strategic base to attack militant targets near the Iraqi border. The recapture of al-Qaryatain came shortly after Syrian troops retook the ancient city of Palmyra. Well, for residents, militants have been eliminated, but the worry of how to rebuild their lives now begins. Luke Schrager reports.
It's been a week since the Syrian army kicked the Islamic State group out of Palmyra, but explosions still echo through the city's ruins. The jihadists left thousands of mines in their wake as they left.
That's an IED we've disarmed. It was under the road, right here. Just next to it was one we couldn't disarm, so we had to blow it up.
Syrian troops have to go building by building. In this one, they found a workshop where the jihadists produced bombs.
This is a chemical laboratory. You've got everything you need to make detonators.
Acetone, acid, glass vials to mix the explosives, and more.
You've got all this electrical material too, wires to set off the explosion.
As the jihadists fled, they had to leave massive amounts of paperwork behind.
That's personal data. How many wives?
Some notebooks contain details of 3 French militants who'd passed through Palmyra, others those of recent recruits.
19 years old, 17?
Some are just 14. Then things take a darker turn.
These are papers from the Islamic court.
Fighting, theft, disobedience, every conviction meticulously noted.
This guy got 15 days in prison for smoking a cigarette.
This is the court in question. It became one of the buildings most feared by Palmyra's residents. This man spent 15 days here. His neighbours denounced him for previously working at the town hall.
There were 100 of us in the cell.
Dozens of names are scrawled across the walls. A testament, a fading trace left by those who feared their bodies would never be found. While this man was finally let go to free up space, others weren't so lucky. Mohammed Saleh fled the city just hours before the jihadists took over. His son refused to leave.
He said, "I've got nothing to hide. Palmyra's my home. I love it." They told him, "We're not giving you the satisfaction of dying here." They took him to a nearby town and killed him there. They filmed the execution and put it on the internet.
No one yet knows just how many suffered the same fate, but Syrian troops discovered a mass grave to the north of the city just days ago.
We found 5 men, 7 women, 8 kids, and a 6-month-old infant. They were buried one on top of the other.
Around 40 bodies were sent to a hospital in Homs. There's little information as to who's responsible for the massacre, though sources close to Syria's opposition say the government's version of events is plausible. Damascus believes the jihadists executed around 300 people during their occupation of Palmyra.
Well, on April 13th, Syrians will head to the polls to vote in the second legislative elections held by the regime since civil war first erupted in 2011. Only those who reside in government-held areas will be eligible to cast their ballots. The polls, though, seem to have sparked little enthusiasm amongst voters.
The streets of Damascus are filled with campaign posters and large banners hung between buildings. Over 11,300 candidates are in the running for the parliamentary election, a record hailed by President Bashar al-Assad. But residents are largely indifferent to the vote.
I've never voted, and I won't vote this time either, because neither the current MPs nor the next ones will do anything for me. It's to each his own. At first, they promise us a lot, and then, once they're in power, they don't speak to us anymore.
I have never voted because my ballot won't change anything, and it won't make any difference in this next election either.
The fighting continues, yet the regime is confident the vote will take place across the country, with the exception of Idlib and Raqqa province that are in the hands of the Nusra Front and the Islamic State group.
In all the other provinces, there are voting stations. There are provinces that have problems, so we put in place voting booths in more secure areas.
In Kamishli, for example, this government military base will welcome voters, a contested decision in this Kurdish region that declared autonomy from Damascus on March 17th.
Given the difficult situation in the country and the ongoing negotiations in Geneva for a peaceful solution to the crisis, this shows that the regime is totally cut off from reality.
The Syrian government's Russian ally supports the election and does not believe it hampers the peace process. Meanwhile, the special UN envoy to Syria is pushing for a parliamentary and presidential vote in a year and a half, supervised by the United Nations.
To Egypt next, where tiny painkillers called Tramadol are proving to be an increasingly worrying health concern. Reputed for improving alertness, they're now more popular than cannabis, but along with the pills comes unpleasant side effects, including addiction, as our correspondents now report from Cairo.
At the Egyptian Center for Addiction, psychologists receive phone calls day and night from addicts who want to give up drugs. Every 2 calls is about one particular medicine, Tramadol. A painkiller in the form of a pill, Tramadol has a reputation for improving alertness. It's become Egypt's favorite recreational drug, supplanting even cannabis.
It's very popular among workers and laborers. They think it gives them more strength to work, and they can stay awake more than 24 hours and earn more money. And students say they can study for longer.
But the side effects of Tramadol are dangerous, and after the euphoria come an array of disorders. Its sale is now highly regulated. Privately owned pharmacies are no longer allowed to sell Tramadol, and possession is illegal.
You may find it in the pharmacies dealing with this kind of drugs, which is very rare in Egypt. But you find it with the drug dealers. There is the drugs in Egypt. So the drug dealers, which deals with cocaine and other stuff, deal with this kind of stuff, with Tramadol.
Despite increased enforcement, Tramadol and generics are still imported illegally from India and China. Its use is widespread in the poorer classes, but also in the rest of society. It's believed to improve sexual prowess, and users can be found among businessmen and the youth. The addiction can be very strong, and for the many Egyptians who succumb to Tramadol, quitting is tough. In this rehabilitation center, some 100 kilometers outside of Cairo, 80% of the patients are former Tramadol addicts. Mina and Andrew both began at a very young age, around 14 years old.
I grew up in a neighborhood where everyone used drugs. It's out there, and I wanted to try.
It's brought home a self-destructive attitude. I couldn't stand myself. I became a pariah. Nobody wanted to see me.
Most addicts stay 6 months in the center. Learning to live without drugs is a challenge, and the epidemic shows little sign of waning. This psychiatrist says the explosion of Tramadol use is related to several factors.
Many people who take tramadol don't see it as a drug. They see it as a medicine. So it's not forbidden by religion, and its price is very low compared to that of hashish or heroin.
The deteriorating political and economic situation has also exacerbated drug use in post-revolution Egypt, where depression and the stresses of daily life have only worsened.
Well, that's all from the Middle East Matters team for now. Don't forget you can watch this show and plenty of others on our website at france24.com. That's, of course, available in French, in English and in Arabic. See you at the same time next week.